I drove through the night after my daughter called me in tears. "Dad, please come. I don't think they're going to let me leave." I waited at the gate until dawn. When it finally opened, my son-in-law's father crossed his arms and nodded toward his grandson, a broad-shouldered young man adjusting his MMA gloves. "He's a black belt. If you want her, you'll have to get past my nephew first." I took off my glasses and put them in my shirt pocket. None of them had any idea who they were dealing with. "I'm grateful you're here. Let me know in the comments, what city, what country are you watching Revenge Dad from today? You'd be surprised how far this reaches. Some elements of this story are fictional, added for storytelling and educational purposes. Any resemblance to names or places is coincidental. The message, however, is one worth keeping. The sawdust never really leaves you. I've been a carpenter for 23 years, and no matter how many times I wash my hands, there's always a thin layer of pale dust settled into the creases of my knuckles, the lines of my palms, the ridges of every scar. My name is Arthur Briggs. I am 68 years old. I live alone in a small house at the end of Sycamore Lane in Millbrook, Virginia, where the hills roll slow and easy, and the October air smells like wood smoke and wet leaves. My shop sits 30 feet from my back door, a converted single-car garage with one sliding window, two fluorescent lights that hum like old hymns, and enough lumber stacked along the walls to keep me busy until I'm 90, which, God willing, I intend to be. That Tuesday morning, I was running a hand plane across a section of white oak when I heard the screen door of the neighboring house bang open. I didn't need to look up. I already knew the footsteps, heavy on the left heel, light on the right, the particular gait of a 16-year-old boy who had never learned to walk quietly in his life. "Mr. Briggs," Jimmy Kowalski hollered from across the yard, waving something above his head like he was signaling a rescue plane. "Mr. Briggs, my grandma's rocking chair is broken again." I set the plane down and pushed my glasses up my nose. Jimmy was standing at the edge of the gravel path, holding a wooden chair spindle in one hand, and wearing an expression of genuine catastrophe, as though the structural failure of a rocking chair was equivalent to a house fire. "Bring it here," I said. He jogged over and dropped the spindle on my workbench with a dramatic clatter. I picked it up, turned it slowly in my fingers. Clean break, right at the shoulder joint. Dry wood old glue. "How'd she break it this time?" I asked. Jimmy winced. She was trying to reach the top shelf in the kitchen. While standing in the rocking chair, I looked at him over the rim of my glasses for a long moment. "Your grandmother is 71 years old, Jimmy." "I know, sir. This wood is solid white oak. You know what's harder than white oak." Jimmy blinked. "No, sir." "Your grandmother's head." I set the spindle down and reached for my bottle of wood glue. "Tell her it'll be ready by Thursday, and tell her the next time she needs something off a high shelf, she calls me, not the rocking chair. $5 for the glue and my time." Jimmy's face broke into a wide, relieved grin, the kind only teenagers can produce, all teeth and zero dignity. "Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Briggs." He was halfway back across the yard when Edna Marsh came around the side of the house, carrying a covered dish with both hands, and moving with the careful determination of a woman who had decided that casseroles were a legitimate form of communication. "Arthur," she called out, "I made too much apple cake again." She never made too much apple cake. She made exactly the right amount, and then brought half of it to me, and we both understood this arrangement without ever saying so directly. Edna was 65, sharp as a finishing nail, and had lived next door to me for 11 years. She knew everything that happened on Sycamore Lane before it finished happening. She set the dish on the corner of my workbench and pulled back the foil, releasing a wave of cinnamon and brown sugar into the sawdust-thick air of my shop. My stomach responded before my manners did. "How's Sarah?" Edna asked, her voice dropping just slightly the way people lower their voices when they're asking about something that sits heavy. I kept my eyes on the spindle I was clamping. "She's fine. I haven't seen her in a while, since the wedding, really." "She's busy," I said. "Derek keeps her busy." Edna made a small sound that wasn't quite agreement and wasn't quite argument. She had opinions about Derek Holt that she was too polite to say directly and too honest to hide completely. I appreciated that about her. I had the same opinions and even less inclination to voice them. "You should visit her," Edna said quietly. "I will," I said. "Soon." She left the cake and went home. I ate a slice standing at my workbench at noon, washing it down with black coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, And I thought about Sarah the way I always did when someone brought her up with a low, persistent ache that lives somewhere behind my sternum, the kind you get used to but never fully stop feeling. She had called 3 weeks ago. Her voice had been light, careful, the way you talk when someone might be listening. She said everything was fine. She said Derek was working hard. She said she was happy. She didn't sound happy, but I hadn't pushed. That was my mistake. A mistake I've turned over in my hands every day since the way you turn a warped board, looking for where it went wrong. That evening, after I swept the shop and locked the sliding window, I went inside and sat on the edge of my bed in the dark. The house was quiet in the way that old houses get quiet, not empty, but settled, like it had breathed in and never quite breathed out. I reached down and pulled the steel box from under the bed. It came out with a soft scrape against the hardwood, the same sound it had made every time I'd touched it in 30 years. I set it on my knee and opened it. Inside, wrapped in a piece of faded olive canvas, was a pair of boxing gloves. Brown leather cracked along the thumb seam, the laces replaced twice, and then abandoned. U.S. Armed Forces Championship, 1982. The year I was 26 years old, and absolutely certain I was invincible. Beneath the gloves was a photograph, black and white, slightly overexposed. 43 men in jump gear standing in 2 rows in front of a C-130 at Fort Bragg. I was in the back row, second from the left, squinting into the Carolina sun with the particular expression of someone who has just been told to smile and has never learned how. I ran my thumb across the surface of the photograph. 43 men. 12 of them gone now one way or another. The rest scattered across the country living their quiet lives, same as me. I closed the box and set it back under the bed. I washed my face, turned off the light, and lay on top of the covers in my work clothes, staring at the ceiling. Outside, the October wind moved through the oak trees along the fence line, pulling the last of the leaves loose. I was almost asleep when the phone rang. The number on the screen was one I didn't recognize. A Virginia area code, but not a Millbrook exchange. I sat up, my heart already doing something my brain hadn't caught up to yet. I answered on the second ring. The voice on the other end was crying so hard she could barely form words. Not the soft crying of someone sad, but the ragged, gasping kind that comes from somewhere deeper. The kind that means fear. It took me 3 full seconds to recognize my own daughter's voice. There are 2 kinds of silence after a phone rings at midnight. The first kind is the silence of bad news, the kind that precedes a doctor's voice, or a police officer's, or a stranger telling you something has happened to someone you love. You brace for it. You've rehearsed it somewhere. In the back of your mind, every parent has. The second kind is worse. It's the silence that isn't silence at all. It's the sound of someone trying to hold themselves together on the other end of the line and failing piece by piece, breath by breath. That ragged underwater sound of a person who has been crying so long, they've forgotten what it felt like not to. That was the sound coming through my phone. Sarah. My voice came out low and steady, the way I'd trained it to be in situations where steady was the only thing that could help. Sarah, I'm right here. Talk to me. A sharp inhale, then her voice broke through thin and trembling, and nothing like the careful, measured tone she'd used 3 weeks ago. Dad. The word came out broken, the way she used to say it when she was small and frightened, stripped of everything except what it meant. Then switching back, voice fracturing on every syllable. Dad, Dad, please. You have to come. They locked me in. I can't get out. And Derek said if I try to leave, he'll... Sarah! I was already on my feet. I didn't remember standing up. Where are you right now? The storage room, off the back hallway. Rosa, she's the housekeeper. She let me use her phone, but she can't stay long if Derek finds out she helped me. He'll fire her, and she has kids. Dad, she has 3 kids, and I can't. Sarah. I said her name a 3rd time, not to interrupt, but to anchor her. Listen to my voice. Are you hurt? A pause that lasted approximately 1 year of my life. Not right now, she whispered. Not right now. 2 of the most devastating words I have ever heard strung together in my 68 years on this earth. Not right now meant there had been a right now before. Not right now meant the question wasn't hypothetical. My chest didn't cave in the way you might expect. Instead, something went very still inside me, the same stillness that used to settle over me in the seconds before a door came off its hinges, back when I was young enough and trained enough to kick doors off their hinges. A cold, clarifying quiet that pushed everything soft to the edges and left only what was necessary in the center. Hush now. I said quietly. "Stop crying, baby girl. I'm coming." "And Dad, it's late. It's almost midnight. You don't have to." "I'm coming," I said again, not louder, just final. I heard her exhale a long, shuddering breath that sounded like a person setting down something they'd been carrying for a very long time. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, Dad. Tell Rosa thank you. Tell her she's brave. Now hang up and keep quiet." The line went dead. I set the phone down on the nightstand. My hands were not shaking. I want to be precise about that, because it matters. My hands were not shaking, and my heart rate had not climbed, and there was no panic moving through me. There was only the stillness, and beneath the stillness, a fury so deep and so cold, it didn't feel like anger at all. It felt like bedrock. I opened my closet and took out my flannel shirt, the old red and black one, soft, from 30 years of washing the one I wore when I needed to work. I buttoned it slowly from the bottom, up the way I always did. I tucked it in. I put on my boots and laced them properly, not because I was in a hurry, but because a man who rushes his bootlaces makes mistakes, and I was not going to make mistakes tonight. I took my keys from the hook by the kitchen door. Outside, the October air hit me sharp and clean, carrying the smell of wood rot and fallen leaves and the distant sweetness of someone's fireplace. The oak trees along the fence line moved in a slow wind, dropping the last of their leaves onto the gravel path. The neighborhood was dark, and still every house buttoned up against the cold. Every house except one. Across the lane, through the thin curtains of her front window, I could see the glow of Edna Marsh's television. She kept it on low when she couldn't sleep, which was most nights. As I walked to my truck, I saw the curtain shift just slightly, just enough. She was watching. She had seen the light come on in my bedroom. She had heard my boots on the porch steps. I glanced over at her window. The curtain held still for a moment, and then Edna's hand appeared at the edge of the glass, not waving, not signaling, just resting there, watching me go. Her face was a pale oval in the darkness, and even from 20 feet away, I could read the worry in the set of her shoulders. I gave her a single nod. She pressed her hand flat against the glass. I got into the truck. The engine turned over on the first try, which it didn't always do in cold weather, and I took that as the only good omen I was going to get tonight. I pulled out of the driveway and onto Sycamore Lane headlights cutting through the dark. The town of Millbrook slid past me, the library, the diner, the hardware store, where I bought most of my lumber, all of them closed and dark and quiet as held breath. I knew where the Holt property was. Everyone in Millbrook knew. Thomas Holt had bought the old Alderman estate 2 years ago, 12 acres on the East Ridge, the kind of house that had columns out front, and a gate at the end of the driveway, the kind of house that announces itself before you can see it clearly. I had driven past it a handful of times since Sarah's wedding, and each time I had kept my eyes on the road and my hands on the wheel and my thoughts to myself. Not tonight. As I drove, I did not think about what I would say when I got there. I did not rehearse arguments or plan contingencies. I thought about Sarah's voice the way it had broken on the word dad, the way her voice had broken on the word dad, the way it used to when she was small, the way she'd said not right now, like it was supposed to be reassuring. I thought about the steel box under my bed, the gloves, the photograph. 43 men who had learned the hard way that the world does not negotiate with you on your timeline. The East Ridge Road curved upward through a stand of old-growth timber, and then the Holt gates appeared in my headlights iron, 12 feet tall, flanked by stone pillars with lights mounted on top. The kind of entrance designed to make you feel small before you've even stopped your car. I pulled up and stopped the engine. I sat in the truck for exactly 10 seconds, breathing slowly, letting the stillness settle all the way down to my fingertips. Then, I opened the door, stepped out into the cold October air, and walked to the gate. Behind those walls, my daughter was locked in a storage room. I had not come here to talk. I waited by the gate until the sky turned gray. There was no point announcing myself at midnight. Men like Thomas Holt didn't open doors at midnight they called lawyers and security companies and let other people handle the inconvenience. So, I sat on the hood of my truck back against the windshield, watching the October stars fade one by one as the eastern ridge slowly swallowed the darkness. At 6:45, the intercom crackled. "Who are you and what do you want?" A man's voice, heavy, irritated, accustomed to being obeyed. "My name is Arthur Briggs," I said. "I'm Sarah's father. I'd like to take her home." A long pause. Then, "Wait there." 10 minutes passed. The gate didn't open. Instead, a side door in the stone wall swung outward, and Thomas Holt stepped through a broad man in his early 60s wearing a pressed Oxford shirt at 7 in the morning, like he'd been awake for hours, or like he'd never slept at all. He had the kind of face that had probably been handsome once, and had since arranged itself into permanent authority. He crossed his arms over his chest and looked at my truck, then at my flannel shirt, then at me, in descending order of interest. "Mr. Briggs." His voice had the particular flatness of a man who had decided this conversation was already over. "Sarah is fine. She's resting. Whatever she told you, she was upset and she exaggerated." "I'd like to see her," I said. "That's not going to happen today." I looked at him for a moment. Then I took my glasses off and put them in my shirt pocket. Thomas Holt's eyes narrowed. He wasn't sure what that meant, but something in his chest apparently registered it as a problem, because he took one step back and raised his hand toward the house. "Tyler," he called out, "come on out here." The young man who emerged from the side door was enormous, 6'5", if he was an inch broad through the shoulders, wearing a compression shirt that left no muscle ungrouped. He was 17 years old and moved with the bouncing, loose-limbed energy of someone who had been told repeatedly that he was dangerous and had decided to believe it entirely. He was pulling on a pair of MMA gloves as he walked, snapping the Velcro with his teeth. "This him?" Tyler said, looking me up and down with an expression of open amusement. "Uncle said you were big. You're not that big." Thomas gestured at me with a dismissive wave. "Mr. Briggs was just leaving. Help him understand that." Tyler rolled his neck until it cracked, bounced twice on his toes, and grinned. "Old man, you know what a liver shot is, because I'm about to show you one. Then I'm going to show you a rear naked choke. Then you're going to wake up in your truck, wondering what happened to your morning." He stepped forward and threw a straight right hand at my face, fast committed, exactly the punch a boy throws when he's been told he's the most dangerous person in the room his entire life. I had seen that punch 10,000 times. I dropped my head left, let the fist go past my ear, and drove my left hook into the soft tissue beneath his right ribs. The liver shot. Short, sharp, every ounce of 68 years of understanding where a body breaks. The sound it made was a single flat crack. Tyler Holt's eyes went wide. Both hands dropped to his side. His knees folded like someone had cut the strings, and he went down to the stone pathway on all fours, mouth open, pulling at air that wouldn't come. His body curled slowly inward, knees drawing toward his chest, forehead pressing toward the ground. He didn't get up. Thomas stared. His mouth was open. He looked at his nephew on the ground, then at me, then back at Tyler, as though repetition might produce a different result. "That," he started. "I'd like to see my daughter," I said. Thomas's jaw tightened. He raised 2 fingers toward the security camera above the gate, and 2 men in dark jackets stepped out from the side entrance, bigger than Tyler, older, the kind of men who got paid to stand in doorways and not smile. They moved to flank me, and I let them, because I hadn't come here to fight a war. I had come here to make one phone call. I reached into my back pocket and took out my phone, old flip model screen cracked across one corner, and dialed a number I had not dialed in almost 4 years. It rang twice. "Arthur." The voice on the other end was deep and unhurried, the voice of a man who had learned patience the same place I had, in loud, dark, unforgiving places where patience was the only thing between you and a catastrophic mistake. "It's early." "I know it is, Ray," I said. "I'm standing in front of a property belonging to a man named Thomas Holt. Holt, Corp, Millbrook, Virginia. I need you to look him up." A brief pause. Then, with the particular tone of a man who already knew this was going to be interesting. "Give me 3 minutes." Thomas Holt was staring at me with an expression that had shifted almost imperceptibly from contempt to something adjacent to unease. He didn't know who I was calling. He didn't know what 3 minutes was going to cost him. On the ground, Tyler was still trying to breathe. 3 minutes. I counted them the way I used to count seconds in dark hallways. Not by looking at a clock, but by the particular weight of time when something is about to change and everyone in the room knows it except the person it's about to happen to. Thomas Holt filled those 3 minutes by talking. "You have no idea what you've walked into," he said, his voice climbing back toward the register of a man who believes his net worth is a form of armor. "My son-in-law is a very important person in this county. We have relationships with people you couldn't get a meeting with. Whatever you think you're doing here, I promise you it will not end the way you imagine." One of the security men shifted his weight. The other kept his eyes on me, professional and blank. Tyler was sitting up now, back against the stone wall, both arms wrapped around his midsection, his face the color of old dishwater. Every few seconds he'd try to straighten up, and then think better of it. His MMA gloves were still on his hands, which struck me as a particularly sad detail. My phone buzzed. I answered it before the second vibration. "Ray, Arthur?" General Ray Harmon's voice came through the speaker with the particular clarity of a man who had never once in his life felt the need to raise it. "Thomas Allen Holt, Holt Corp. LLC, registered in Virginia principal offices in Millbrook, currently holding a preliminary approval on a Department of Defense logistics subcontract value approximately $30 million pending final security vetting. That about right?" "That sounds right," I said. Thomas Holt had stopped talking. I noticed that. "I've flagged the contract for emergency suspension review," Harmon said. "Conflict of interest, the lead federal assessor on Holt Corp's security file, has reported a hostile confrontation on private property involving physical intimidation and unlawful detention of a family member. Under Federal Acquisition Regulation 9.505, that's sufficient grounds to pause the entire bid process pending investigation." A brief pause. "You want me to stay on the line?" "Just for another minute," I said. I turned to face Thomas Holt directly. He was staring at the phone in my hand with an expression I had seen before, not on boardrooms or construction sites, but in the moments just before something structural fails. The look of a man watching a load-bearing wall begin to lean. "That contract," I said, "is suspended as of this morning." Thomas opened his mouth, closed it. His face had gone through approximately 4 distinct colors in the span of 10 seconds, red, then white, then a grayish purple that concerned me slightly from a medical standpoint. You can't just," he started. "The Federal Acquisition Regulation can," I said. "Your lawyers will explain it to you." From somewhere inside the house came the sound of expensive ceramic meeting, Italian tile at terminal velocity. Thomas's coffee cup, I presume based on the trajectory of his left hand. The two security men looked at each other. Then, without a word exchanged, both of them took one deliberate step to the side. Not retreating professional men don't retreat, but repositioning the way people do when they've correctly identified which direction things are falling. Thomas Holt stood in his stone driveway with his mouth slightly open and $30 million evaporating in the morning air. And for one long moment, he looked exactly like what he was, a man who had confused his net worth for his power, and was only now beginning to understand the difference. "I want to see my daughter," I said. "Right now." He looked at me. Something moved behind his eyes, calculation furious and rapid. And then, because Thomas Holt was above all else a practical man, he turned and typed a code into the panel beside the gate. The iron gate swung open. I walked through without looking at him. The house was enormous up close, columns, portico, the whole performance. I didn't care about any of it. I followed the stone path around the side of the building, to the back, where a row of narrow doors marked what had once been servants' quarters. The third door from the end had a bolt on the outside. A bolt on the outside. My jaw tightened. I drew one slow breath through my nose, held it for a count of 3 and let it out. Then I slid the bolt back and opened the door. The room was small and smelled of cardboard and cleaning supplies. A single bare bulb burned overhead. Sarah was sitting on the floor with her back against a metal shelving unit, knees drawn up to her chest, still wearing the same clothes she'd apparently had on for at least a day. Her eyes were swollen nearly shut from crying, her lower lip split and faintly discolored at the corner. When she saw me, she made a sound I cannot adequately describe, somewhere between a sob and a gasp. The sound of a person who has stopped believing rescue is possible and is suddenly confronted with evidence to the contrary. She pressed both hands over her mouth, and her whole body shook. "Dad!" she whispered through her fingers. "Dad, you're here." "I'm here," I said. I crossed the room in 3 steps, crouched down beside her, and put my hand on her shoulder. Her whole frame was trembling, fine and constant like a wire under tension. "Can you walk?" She nodded, wiping her face with the back of her hand, trying to pull herself upright. Her legs were unsteady. She grabbed my forearm with both hands, gripping hard knuckles white. "I've got you," I said. "Slow, take your time." We walked out of that room together into the morning light. Sarah kept her face turned away from the house, away from the driveway, away from Thomas Holt, standing motionless beside his open gate, with the ruins of his morning arrangement around his feet. I helped her into the passenger seat of my truck, closed the door gently, and walked around to the driver's side. As I started the engine, Sarah reached out and put her hand over mine on the gear shift, just rested it there, not squeezing, just contact. Proof that this was real. I pulled out of the driveway and onto the ridge road, heading back toward Millbrook. Neither of us spoke for almost a mile. Then Sarah turned her face toward the window, watching the trees move past, and said quietly, "Dad, how do you know General Harmon?" I kept my eyes on the road. One corner of my mouth moved, not quite a smile, but the shape of one. "From back when he didn't know how to throw a punch," I said. Sarah made a small sound that might under different circumstances have been a laugh. It didn't last long, but it was there. We got back to Sycamore Lane just after 8 in the morning. I made Sarah eat something: scrambled eggs, toast, a glass of orange juice that she held with both hands like she needed the weight of it. She sat at my kitchen table in a pair of my old socks and one of my flannel shirts 3 sizes too big. And she ate slowly and carefully, the way people eat when they've forgotten that eating is supposed to be normal. I sat across from her and drank my coffee and did not ask questions. Not yet. There would be time for questions. Right now she needed food and warmth and a table that nobody was going to flip. Edna knocked on the back door. At 8:30, took one look at Sarah's face and pressed her lips together so hard they went white. She didn't say anything dramatic. She just put a hand on Sarah's shoulder for a moment, then turned to me and said, "I'll bring lunch at noon," and left. That was Edna, 65 years old, and she understood that sometimes the most useful thing a person can do is feed someone and not make them talk about it. Sarah fell asleep on my couch at 9:15, still wrapped in the flannel shirt, her breathing slow, and even for the first time since I'd found her on that storage room floor, I covered her with the quilt Margaret had made the winter before Sarah was born. Blue and cream, slightly faded now, still the warmest thing in the house. I stood in the doorway and watched her sleep for a moment. Then I went to the kitchen, poured the rest of the coffee down the drain, and made a fresh pot. Edna called at 7 that evening. "Arthur," she said, her voice lower than usual, "there's a car at the Holt property. A black one came up the ridge road about an hour ago. I only noticed because Jimmy was out front and he said it drove past twice before it turned in." "What kind of car?" "One of those big German ones, the kind that cost more than my house." Derek, I thought, back from wherever he'd been. I thanked Edna and hung up. Sarah was awake by then, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. Her eyes less swollen, but her expression carrying the particular careful blankness of someone who has spent a long time learning not to show what they're thinking. I sat down across from her. "Derek's home," I said. She set the cup down. Her hands, I noticed, had started to tremble, a fine involuntary shaking that she pressed flat against the table to hide. "How long do we have?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "Tell me about him, not about what he did, about how he thinks." She looked at me for a long moment, surprised by the distinction. Then she took a breath and started talking. Derek Holt was 30 years old and had been the chief financial officer of Holt Corp in everything but title since he was 27. Thomas had handed him operational control. Gradually, the way you hand a teenager the car keys, not realizing until too late that the teenager had somewhere specific in mind. He was methodical. He planned things in advance and kept contingencies. He did not lose his temper in public. He was. Sarah said the kind of man who smiled most when he was the angriest, which was the detail that had taken her the longest to understand. "He'll have a plan already," she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were still trembling against the tabletop. "He doesn't react. He prepares. Before he went on this trip, he said if I ever tried to leave, he had ways of making sure I came back. I didn't know what that meant. I thought he was just..." She stopped, swallowed. "I thought he was just trying to scare me." "He was also trying to inform you," I said. She nodded slowly. "He's not going to call. He's not going to show up here tonight. He's going to do something systematic, something that looks legal." Smart girl, I thought. Always was. The phone rang at 9:45. Unknown number, different from Rose's, different from Sarah's. I answered it anyway. "Mr. Briggs." The voice was smooth, unhurried, and carried the particular confidence of a man who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. "This is Derek Holt. I think we should talk like reasonable people." "Go ahead," I said. "My wife is a guest in your home. I'd like her to come back." A pause designed to feel like generosity. "I understand there was some confusion this morning. I've been traveling. I wasn't aware that Sarah was distressed. I'd like the opportunity to address that directly. Across the table, Sarah had gone completely rigid. Her knuckles were white around the teacup. Her eyes were fixed on my face with an intensity that made my chest ache. I kept my voice level. Sarah is resting. She'll contact you when she's ready. A beat of silence. When Derek spoke again, the smoothness had thinned just slightly like paint over rust. Mr. Briggs, I want to be clear about something. I know who General Harmon is. I know that my father's contract was flagged this morning. And I want you to understand that a single phone call between old friends does not constitute real power. He let that sit for a moment. I have relationships in this county that go considerably deeper than a Department of Defense subcontract. I would encourage you to think carefully about your next move. I've thought about it, I said. Good night, Derek. I hung up. Sarah stared at me. Her lower lip was trembling now, the split corner pulling tight. He knows about Harmon, she whispered. Dad, if he knows he's going to, he knows a name, I said. He doesn't know what it means yet. I reached across the table and put my hand over her shaking ones. He thinks I'm an old carpenter who got lucky with a phone call. Let him think that. She searched my face for something reassurance maybe, or certainty. I don't know if she found it. What I know is that she stopped trembling slowly by degrees the way a struck bell goes quiet. Outside, a car moved slowly down Sycamore Lane. No headlights, just the low rumble of an engine in the dark, moving at the pace of a man who wanted to know the layout of a place before he decided what to do with it. I looked at the clock. 3 minutes past 10. Sheriff Dale Croft, I would later learn, drove a dark blue county cruiser when he was off duty. 17 years serving Millbrook, and he had never once driven past my house at 10 o'clock at night. He was starting to, now. They came at 7 in the morning. I heard them before I saw them. 3 county vehicles pulling onto Sycamore Lane with their light bars running, the particular sound of official machinery arriving at a place it has no good reason to be. I was already up, already dressed already on my second cup of coffee when the headlights swept across my kitchen window. Sarah appeared in the hallway doorway, hair loose, eyes wide. Dad, go back inside, I said quietly. Stay away from the windows. She pressed her back against the wall and wrapped her arms around herself, and I could see her chest rising and falling too fast. The old fear snapping back into her body like a rubber band pulled too far. I wanted to tell her it was going to be fine. Instead, I told her the truth. This is Derek doing what Derek does. Let him. I stepped out onto the porch. Sheriff Dale Croft was a big man gone soft in the middle with a gray mustache and the careful eyes of someone who had learned to look busy while doing as little as possible. He climbed out of the lead vehicle holding a manila folder and walked toward me with the particular gait of a man who was very aware that other people were watching him. Mr. Briggs, he held out a document. I have a municipal order here authorizing the temporary closure of the commercial premises at this address pending a zoning compliance review. I'm going to need you to vacate the workshop and allow us to place the official seals. I took the paper, read it slowly, top to bottom. The language was correct. The signature was a magistrate's. Derek had moved faster than I expected, which meant he'd had this ready before he ever made that phone call last night. I handed the paper back to Croft. You're going to put paper on my shop, I said. Yes, sir. Over a zoning review. That's what the order says, sir. I looked at him for a long moment. Croft met my eyes for about 2 seconds before he found something interesting to look at near my left shoulder. A man who could not hold eye contact with the person he was wronging that told me something useful about how this was going to end. Go ahead, I said. I stood on the porch with my coffee and watched them seal my shop. 3 men with official tape and official stickers moving with official efficiency and all of it as hollow as a termite-eaten beam. Across the lane, Edna Marsh had come out onto her porch in her housecoat, arms folded, watching with an expression that could have stripped paint. 2 houses down, Pastor Glenn Webb, 70 years old, silver-haired, built like a man who had once been very strong and never entirely stopped, stood at the end of his driveway with his hands in his pockets and said nothing. He didn't need to. Glenn had been my friend for 19 years. His presence was a form of speech. Jimmy Kowalski, who had apparently decided that Tuesday morning was an excellent time to take photographs of county officials performing questionable duties, was crouched behind Edna's rosebush with his phone raised. I made a mental note to tell him later that he'd done the right thing. When Croft's vehicles finally pulled away, Glenn walked across the lane and stopped at the bottom of my porch steps. He looked at the yellow seal tape across my shop door for a moment, then up at me. "Zoning review," he said. "Apparently." He made a sound that was not quite a word and contained an entire sermon. Then he said, "You eatin' breakfast? Coffee?" I said, "That's not breakfast, Arthur." He climbed the steps and went inside like he owned the place, which was close enough to true that I didn't argue. The afternoon brought the second message. I was in the backyard when I heard Sarah make a sharp sound from the front of the house. Not a scream, something smaller and more frightened than that. I came around the corner and found her standing at the porch railing, staring at the front gate. Someone had thrown red paint across it in the night, or perhaps that morning, while Croft's people were busy with the official theater in the back. It had dried in long drips down the wood slats, the color of something I didn't want to name. Sarah's hand was pressed over her mouth, her eyes glassy and bright. With tears, she was trying very hard not to shed. Her whole body had gone stiff the way it had in the kitchen when Derek called that involuntary locking up, like a person bracing for impact. "Hey," I stepped up beside her. "Look at me." She turned. Her eyes were wet, one tear breaking loose and tracking down her cheek before she caught it with the back of her hand. "It's paint," I said. "I've cleaned paint off worse things than a fence gate. Come inside." She let out a shaky breath that was almost a laugh. "He's trying to scare us." "He's trying to scare you," I said. "He doesn't know me well enough yet to know what scares me." That night I lit candles the power had held, but I knew it was borrowed time, and Sarah and I ate dinner at the kitchen table, the way we used to when she was small and Margaret was alive, and supper was the 1 hour of the day that belonged only to us. Chicken soup from a can, crackers the last of Edna's apple cake. Sarah watched the candle flame for a while, her spoon moving slow circles in her bowl. Then she said, "Tell me something about before, about when you were young." So I told her about 1982, about Fort Bragg in August, which is as hot as anywhere on earth has a right to be, about a regional armed forces boxing tournament that nobody outside the military cared about, and that I had trained for every day for 11 months. About climbing into a ring in a gym that smelled of rubber and sweat, and winning 3 fights in one afternoon by a combination of stubbornness and one very reliable left hook. Sarah smiled, a real one, small and tired, but real. "Did you ever lose?" I turned my coffee cup in my hands. "Once," I said, "but not in a ring." She looked at me, knew better than to push. That was one of the things I'd always loved about my daughter. She understood that some silences were doors, not walls, and that the right response was to wait, not knock. We finished dinner. I washed the bowls, Sarah dried them and put them away, and for 20 minutes the kitchen was warm and ordinary and almost fine. I woke at 5 the next morning to the sound of pipes that had gone quiet. I turned the kitchen tap. Nothing. I tried the bathroom. Nothing. I went to the sink, filled a glass from the emergency pitcher I kept in the back of the cabinet, and drank it slowly, standing at the window in the gray pre-dawn light. The shop was sealed. The gate was red. The water was gone. 5 more days. On the 3rd day without water, I boiled what I needed from the well. The well was behind the shop, between the woodpile and the old fence dug in. 1996, the summer Margaret was pregnant, and we had had a dry spell bad enough that the county put restrictions on municipal usage. I had dug it myself, over 2 weekends in July, 6 feet down, through clay and shale, because I was 29 years younger and considerably more stubborn than I am now, and because Margaret had said it was unnecessary, and I had decided that was a reason to do it rather than not. She was right, of course. We never needed it. Right up until the morning, I needed it very badly. Sarah helped without being asked, heating water on the gas stove, filling pitchers, setting them in the bathroom. She moved through the house with a quiet efficiency that told me she had spent time in harder situations than this and had learned to function inside them. That thought did not make me feel better. It made me feel the particular grief of a father who understands too late what his child had been living through. At 2 in the afternoon, I heard a soft knock at the back door. Not the front, the back. I crossed the kitchen and looked through the curtain. A woman stood on the rear step, 40 or so, dark hair tucked under a gray knit cap, pulled low a canvas bag over one shoulder. She was looking down the alley toward the street, then back at the door, then down the alley again, with the careful movements of someone who understood that being seen here could cost her something she couldn't afford to lose. I opened the door. "Mr. Briggs." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "My name is Rosa Delgado. I worked for the Holt family. Sarah knows me." "I know who you are," I said. "Come in." She stepped inside quickly and I closed the door behind her. Sarah had appeared in the kitchen doorway, and the moment she saw Rosa, her face crumpled. She crossed the room in 3 steps and pulled the woman into a hug so tight that Rosa made a small sound of surprise, and then her arms came up and held on just as hard. They stood there like that, Sarah's shoulders shaking Rosa, pressing her cheek against Sarah's hair, both of them holding the other up. Rosa's eyes were wet. She was whispering something. I couldn't hear words that weren't meant for me, and I turned to look out the window and give them what privacy a small kitchen allows. After a moment, Sarah pulled back, wiping her face roughly with her sleeve. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "If Derek finds out—" "Derek doesn't know I quit this morning," Rosa said. "By the time he figures it out, it won't matter." She set the canvas bag on the kitchen table and looked at me. "Mr. Briggs, I need you to look at something." She reached into the bag and took out a USB drive, small gray, the kind you buy in a 3-pack at any drugstore. She set it on the table between us. "I've been with the Holt family for 3 years, she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. They moved to her coat zipper and back restless and tight. "I have 3 children. The youngest is 4. I need my job, and I have needed my job, and that is the reason I am standing here asking you to forgive me for not coming sooner, because I should have come sooner, and I did not, and I have to live with that." "Rosa," Sarah said softly, "you don't have to—" "Yes, I do." Rosa's voice cracked on the second word. She pressed 2 fingers against her mouth for a moment, collecting herself, and then she dropped her hand and kept going. "I started keeping records about 8 months after I started working there. I didn't know what I was going to do with them. I couldn't watch and do nothing. So I did something small because small was what I had." She touched the USB drive with 1 finger. Photographs, dates and times written down. 2 audio recordings made on my personal phone. While I was present in the room, I looked it up. Virginia is a 1-party consent state. I was there. It's legal. I picked up the drive and turned it in my fingers. "What's on the recordings?" Rosa drew a breath. "The first one is Derek telling Sarah that if she called the police, he would make sure her father lost his business and went to prison for assault. He was very specific." She paused. "The second one is from 14 months ago. I won't describe it, but it is very clear and it is very complete, and it will not leave any room for doubt about what kind of man Derek Holt is." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a car moved slowly down the back alley, unhurried, deliberate, and I watched it through the window until it was gone. Sarah had sat down at the table. She was staring at the USB drive with an expression I hadn't seen on her face before, something between grief and relief, the look of a person seeing something that validates a pain they had almost convinced themselves they'd imagined. Her jaw was tight, her eyes were bright and fierce and full. "You kept all of this?" she said, not quite a question. "Every bit of it," Rosa said. "And I am sorry it took me this long to bring it to you. I was afraid. I am still afraid." She looked at me directly. "But I am more afraid of what happens if I don't." I stood up, went to the counter and poured 3 glasses of water from the pitcher. I set 1 in front of Rosa, 1 in front of Sarah, and kept 1 for myself. "Did Sarah tell you she agreed to having this kept?" I asked Rosa. "I told her about a year ago that I was writing things down," Rosa said. "She told me to stop, that it wasn't safe. I kept going anyway." I looked at Sarah. She met my eyes. "I'm glad she did," Sarah said quietly. "I'm glad someone did because Her voice broke sudden and sharp, and she pressed her hand over her eyes. I had stopped believing anyone would ever see it. I had started thinking maybe I was wrong about— "You were not wrong," Rosa said with a ferocity that surprised me. She reached across the table and gripped Sarah's wrist. "You were never wrong. Don't say that." Sarah nodded, jaw working, pulling herself back together piece by piece. I set the USB drive in my shirt pocket and buttoned the flap over it. The next morning, a document arrived by courier, a temporary detention order, signed by Magistrate Ellis of Millbrook District Court, citing concern for Sarah's mental and emotional stability, and authorizing her involuntary evaluation at a county facility within 48 hours. The signatures of 2 referring physicians were listed. One of them was a Dr. Raymond Warren of Richmond. I called Dr. Warren's office that afternoon. The receptionist told me Dr. Warren was currently on a fishing trip in Montana and had been for the past 10 days. I looked at the TDO for a long moment. Then I looked at Sarah, who had read it over my shoulder and whose face had gone the color of old paper, whose hands were gripping the back of my chair so hard her knuckles had gone white. "Dad," she whispered. "Dad, they can take me. If that order is valid, they can just—" "It isn't valid," I said. I folded the document and put it in the same pocket as the USB drive. And by the time Derek finds that out, it's going to be too late for him to do anything about it. I covered her hands with mine. Her fingers were ice cold, trembling against the wood of the chair. "Can you trust me for 2 more days?" She looked at me. Her eyes were wet, afraid, exhausted. But beneath all of that, something steadier, something that had always been there, even when everything else was falling apart. "Yes," she said. "I trust you, Dad." Tomorrow I was going to the library. The Millbrook Public Library opened at 8 o'clock in the morning. I was sitting on the front steps at 7:55, a paper cup of vending machine coffee going cold in my hand, watching Main Street come to life the way small towns do, slowly without drama, one open sign at a time. The hardware store at 7:40. The diner at 8. The barbershop wouldn't open until 9, and the flower shop across the street wouldn't bother until 10, because Carol Hutchins, who owned it, had made a private arrangement with herself that mornings before 10 didn't count. I had not slept. Not because I was afraid, I want to be clear about that, but because there are nights when the mind refuses to stand down, when it keeps running, contingencies and backup plans and worst-case scenarios the way an engine keeps turning over after you've cut the ignition. I had lain on my bed fully dressed until 4 in the morning, and then I had gotten up and sat at the kitchen table and waited for the sky to lighten. Sarah had found me there at 6. She had looked at my face, looked at the untouched mug of tea in front of me, and said nothing about any of it. She had simply made a fresh pot of coffee, poured 2 cups, and sat down across from me. We had watched the dawn come through the kitchen window together, and that had been enough. The library door opened at 8 on the dot. I went straight to the computer terminals in the back corner, the ones the library used for public internet access, and sat down at the one farthest from the main desk. It took me 11 minutes to do what I needed to do. I had the USB Rosa had given me. I had a folder of documents I had been quietly assembling for the past 2 days, printed records, dates, names, a timeline I had written out longhand on the back of a hardware receipt, and then transferred into a text file. I encrypted the package using a method Ray Harmon had taught me years ago, back when he was explaining why certain communications needed to not exist on regular servers. Then, I attached it to an email addressed to a government account I had memorized and never written down, and I sent it. Then I sat back and waited. The response came 40 minutes later, not from Harmon directly, but from a routing system that told me the package had been received and flagged for priority review. 10 minutes after that, my phone buzzed. "Arthur?" Harmon's voice had changed. The easy humor was gone, not replaced by alarm, but by something more focused, a particular quality of attention I remembered from the few times I had seen him in genuinely serious situations. "I've looked at what you sent." "And," I said, "the financial records alone are enough for a federal investigation. Wire fraud money laundering the structures Derek Holt used to move money through his father's logistics contracts are not subtle. He was either arrogant or in a hurry, and my guess is both." A pause. "The audio recordings are going to matter. The photographs are going to matter more. What about the TDO, forged physician's signature on a document submitted to a magistrate's court?" Harmon said. "That's 18 U.S.C. 1001 false statements to a government agency. Felony, federal." Another pause. "Arthur, this man has been committing federal crimes inside a Department of Defense supply chain. This is not a domestic matter anymore. This is mine." I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief exactly, but the easing of a tension I had been holding so long, I had forgotten it was there. "How long?" I said. "That's what I need to explain to you." Harmon's voice was measured and deliberate, the voice of a man who was about to say something he knew I wasn't going to like. "I'm going to activate the Army Criminal Investigation Division on the contract fraud. They will coordinate with the FBI on the domestic charges. An agent named Dana Reeves will be the lead. She's good, Arthur. She's thorough, and she's fast, and she does not make mistakes in court." "But," I said, "but I need you to give me 48 hours. The library was very quiet around me. A woman 2 terminals down was looking at real estate listings. A teenage boy near the window was doing something that was probably homework and probably wasn't. 48 hours, I repeated. If we move now, we can arrest Derek Holt tonight, Harmon said. But we cannot convict him tonight. A defense attorney will have him out on bail inside 6 hours, and the moment he's out, the evidence chain becomes compromised. Witnesses become frightened, and we are back to, he said, she said, in a county where he has bought the magistrate and the sheriff. His voice stayed even patient, explaining something he had clearly thought through completely. If I wait 48 hours, I can build a case that puts him away for 14 years instead of getting him a fine and a slap on the wrist. Arthur, can you wait 48 hours? I thought about Sarah's hands on the back of the kitchen chair, cold as window glass, shaking like a leaf in October wind. I thought about the TDO sitting in my shirt pocket. I thought about a storage room with a bolt on the outside of the door. I have waited 68 years, I said. I can wait 48 hours. Good man, Harmon said quietly. There was something in his voice then, not sentiment exactly, but the particular warmth of someone who has known you long enough to mean it when they say it. One more thing. I'm coming to Millbrook. I'll be there tomorrow evening. Don't cook. I'll bring food. Despite everything, I almost smiled. You never could cook either, Ray. That's why I'm bringing it from somewhere else. Lock your doors tonight. He hung up. I sat at the library terminal for another minute, not looking at the screen. Outside the tall windows, Millbrook went about its Tuesday morning, a delivery truck double-parked in front of the hardware store, 2 women walking a dog past the diner, a child on a bicycle navigating the sidewalk with great seriousness of purpose, normal, ordinary, entirely unaware. I returned the cup to the vending machine area, thanked the librarian at the front desk for no particular reason, and drove home. That evening, Pastor Glenn Webb came around the back of the house, just as the sun was going down behind the ridge. He did not knock. He simply settled into the second porch chair, the one that had been empty since Margaret died, and produced a thermos of tea from somewhere inside his jacket, like a man who had planned this visit some time ago and had made the appropriate preparations. I sat down beside him. The shop was still sealed. The gate was still red. The water was still off. None of that had changed. You look like a man who's done something, Glenn said, pouring tea into the thermos cap and handing it to me. I sent an email, I said. Glenn considered this. Must have been some email. It was to the right person. He nodded slowly the way he did when he was deciding whether a thing needed more words or fewer. He decided on fewer. We sat on the porch in the cooling evening air, and Glenn drank his tea and I drank mine, and somewhere down the lane, a dog was barking at something it would never catch, and the oak trees along the fence were moving in a slow wind, and tomorrow, Ray Harmon was coming to Millbrook. 24 hours. Derek Holt had absolutely no idea. The 6th day was the quietest. No cars driving slowly past the house. No official envelopes arriving by courier. No phone calls from smooth voices making veiled threats. Just the October wind moving through the oak trees and the particular silence of a house that has been waiting a long time for something to either happen or stop threatening to. Sarah spent most of the day at the kitchen table writing. I didn't ask what letters may be, or simply the act of putting things into words so they couldn't be taken back. I made soup from what was left in the pantry, and we ate lunch together and did not talk about tomorrow, and in the afternoon she fell asleep in the armchair by the window, with a blanket over her shoulders and her pen still in her hand. I watched her sleep the way I had when she was small, checking without meaning to, that she was still breathing, that the rise and fall of her chest was steady and real. Some habits don't leave you, some fears don't either. At 7 in the evening, a dark sedan pulled quietly onto Sycamore Lane and parked in front of my house. I was on the porch when it arrived. 2 people got out, a tall man in a plain gray sweater who moved with the unhurried precision of someone who has spent his entire adult life being the most prepared person in any room he entered, and a woman in her mid-40s carrying a leather satchel, dark-haired with the brisk, evaluating manner of someone accustomed to forming accurate judgments quickly. Ray Harmon looked almost exactly as I remembered him. Older, obviously we both were, but the same straight back, the same economy of movement, the same eyes that took in everything and gave away very little. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps and looked up at me. His face broke into something that was not quite a smile, but was warmer than his usual expression allowed. "Arthur," he said. "Ray," I said. We shook hands. It was a firm handshake, the kind between men who have known each other long enough that they don't need to prove anything by it, but do it properly anyway out of respect for the history. "This is Dr. Carol Sims," Harmon said, turning to the woman beside him. "She's a forensic psychiatrist, federally certified. She's here to conduct an independent evaluation of Sarah, which will produce the documentation that makes the TDO completely unenforceable and adds the forgery charge to Derek's file." Dr. Sims nodded at me with the professional efficiency of someone who had been briefed completely and didn't need the social niceties. "Mr. Briggs, is your daughter available?" "She's inside," I said. "I'll get her." I showed Dr. Sims to the kitchen and introduced her to Sarah, who looked at the woman with the wide, cautious eyes of someone who has been told by official documents that her own mind cannot be trusted and is now being asked to trust another official. It was a look that made my jaw tighten until my back teeth ached. "Nobody is testing you," Dr. Sims said, sitting down at the kitchen table with a directness that managed to be both clinical and kind. "I am going to ask you questions and write down exactly what you tell me. At the end of it, I will produce a report that says what I actually found, which will be that you are a competent adult woman with full decision-making capacity who has been subjected to a pattern of coercive control. That report goes to a federal judge. The TDO goes in the garbage." Sarah stared at her for a moment. Then very slowly some of the tension went out of her shoulders. Not all of it, not even most of it, but enough that she could breathe properly. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay, I can do that." I left them to it and went back to the porch where Harmon was sitting in Glenn's chair with a paper bag from the Italian place in town that I hadn't been to in years. "You brought food," I said. "I said I would." He opened the bag and produced 2 containers of something that smelled like garlic and rosemary. "Sit down, Arthur. Eat something that isn't crackers." We ate on the porch as the evening darkened around us, pasta, good bread, a thermos of coffee that Harmon had also brought, because he had apparently assessed my coffee situation and found it wanting. For a while, we didn't talk about any of it. He asked about the woodworking. I asked about his family. It was the conversation of 2 old men who had earned the right to talk about ordinary things. Then Harmon set down his fork and looked out at the dark lane and said, "Do you remember Fort Bragg? 82. "I've been thinking about it," I said. "You hit me so hard the first day that I genuinely considered going AWOL, he said. "I want you to know that. Despite everything, I laughed a short real one, the kind that surprises you. You hit back harder every time. Because you kept saying the same thing, every time I went down." He paused. "Do you remember what you said?" "Get up," I said. "That's all I ever said." "That's all I ever needed," Harmon said simply. We sat with that for a moment. Around us, Millbrook settled into its nighttime quiet. After Harmon and Dr. Sims had gone to their respective corners of the house, Dr. Sims to the spare room, Harmon to the couch, with the particular lack of complaint of a man who had slept in considerably worse places. I went to my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark. I reached under the bed and pulled out the steel box. I opened it and took the gloves out one more time, not to use, not to remember exactly, but the way you handle something old and true when you need to feel the weight of where you've been. The leather was cold in my hands. The laces had been replaced twice and then abandoned. The left glove was slightly more worn than the right, the way it always is for southpaws. And that asymmetry told the whole story of my fighting life in a way that no trophy ever could. I heard Sarah's door open and her footsteps in the hallway, and then she appeared in my doorway still in her borrowed flannel shirt, hair-loose feet and wool socks. She looked at me and at the gloves, and she didn't say anything for a moment. Then she crossed the room and sat down beside me on the edge of the bed, close enough that her shoulder pressed against mine. "Dr. Sims seems good," she said. "She is," I said. A pause. Outside, the wind moved through the oaks. "Dad." Her voice was very quiet. "Are you scared?" I turned the left glove in my hands. Thought about the question the way it deserved to be thought about, honestly, completely without shortcuts. "I was scared once," I said. "The night your mother didn't come back from the hospital. I held you in that waiting room, and I didn't know how to do any of it, how to be what you needed, how to be enough. That was the only time." I set the glove down on my knee. After that, I figured if I'd made it through that night, I could make it through most things. Sarah made a sound that was half breath, half something else. She leaned her head against my shoulder, and I put my arm around her and we sat like that, on the edge of the bed, with the old gloves between us and the whole night ahead. "Get some sleep," I said eventually. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." She lifted her head and looked at me with the particular expression she'd had since she was 4 years old, the one that meant she understood more than she was saying and was choosing her words carefully. "Okay, Dad," she said. She stood pressed a kiss to the top of my head, a thing she hadn't done since she was maybe 9 years old, and went back to her room. I sat alone for another few minutes. Then I put the gloves back in the box, closed the lid, and slid it under the bed. I lay down on top of the covers without undressing. At 5:40 in the morning, before the sky had done anything other than think about lightning, I heard the sound of vehicles on the Ridge Road, more than one, moving with purpose. Tomorrow had arrived. Before I tell you what Derek walked into that morning, drop a 7 in the comments if you're still here. I want to know how many of you stayed this far. Because what happens next, nobody saw it coming. Just a reminder, this story contains some fictional elements crafted for storytelling purposes. If that's not for you, no hard feelings, this is a good place to step away. I heard the convoy before I saw it. 2 tow trucks, 1 county cruiser, 1 white van with no markings that I recognized as the kind hospitals send when they don't want to alarm people, and 3 black SUVs that belonged to nobody official, but were the sort of vehicles that men like Derek Holt rented when they wanted to look like they did. They came up Sycamore Lane at 6:15 in the morning, moving with the particular confidence of people who believe they have already won. Jimmy Kowalski was standing at the end of his grandmother's driveway in a jacket 2 sizes too big. Phone raised recording before the first vehicle had even stopped. 16 years old and smarter than half the adults on this street. I made a note to tell him that someday. I was sitting at the kitchen table when the front door came open. Derek hadn't knocked, which told me everything I needed to know about how he viewed other people's property, and by extension, other people. He was 30 years old and had the kind of good looks that photographed well and meant nothing in person. The face of a man who had learned early that appearance was a form of leverage. He was wearing a suit at 6 in the morning. He had brought 6 men with him who were built like furniture and dressed in black. Sheriff Dale Croft came in behind them, thumbs in his belt, not making eye contact with anyone. Derek stopped in the kitchen doorway. The lights were on. The table was set. 3 people were eating breakfast eggs, toast, coffee with the unhurried calm of people who had been expecting company and had decided not to be impressed by it. Derek's eyes moved from me to Sarah to the third person at the table. A man in a plain gray sweater, silver-haired, broad-shouldered eating, scrambled eggs with the focused attention of someone for whom breakfast was a serious undertaking. Something moved across Derek's face, not quite recognition, not quite uncertainty. Something in between. He stepped forward and brought the flat of his hand down on the table hard enough to rattle the coffee cups. "Where is the power coming from?" he demanded. "I had this house cut off 4 days ago." The man in the gray sweater set his fork down, picked up his coffee cup, took a slow, deliberate sip. Then he looked at Derek Holt for the first time, and Derek Holt, to his credit, did not look away. He just didn't seem to understand yet what he was looking at. "Who are you?" Derek said. The man stood up. He was taller than he had appeared, sitting down 6'2", straight-backed, with the kind of physical presence that doesn't come from size alone, but from decades of certainty about exactly how much space you are entitled to occupy. The kitchen, which had seemed adequate 30 seconds ago, abruptly felt smaller. "You asked where the power came from," the man said. His voice was level and unhurried, the voice of someone who had never once in his life needed to raise it to be heard. "A DOD facilities team reconnected it last night, on my authorization." Derek stared. "Your authorization?" A short, disbelieving sound. "And who exactly are you?" "My name is Raymond Harmon." A pause, brief and deliberate. "You may know me better by my title, though I find titles are usually most useful to people who don't actually have them." The silence that followed lasted approximately 3 seconds. Then Derek's jaw tightened and he turned to Croft. "Dale, we have a TDO. Execute it." Croft stepped forward and then stopped. His eyes had found Harmon's face, and whatever he saw there had apparently communicated something that his employer had not yet grasped, because the color had begun draining from Dale Croft's face in a slow downward tide, starting at his forehead and moving south. "Dale!" Derek said, again, sharper. Croft opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Harmon, looked at the floor. From outside through the kitchen window came a sound that did not belong to Derek Holt's convoy. Heavier, more purposeful, the deep mechanical rumble of vehicles with actual authority behind them. Derek heard it too. He turned toward the window, and for the first time since he had walked through my door, something appeared on his face that I recognized from a long time ago, from dark rooms and difficult situations, and the particular moment when a person understands that the ground they were standing on was not in fact ground. It was the look of a man realizing he had miscalculated. Badly. Derek Holt recovered faster than I expected. That was the thing about men like him. They bent under surprise, but they didn't break easily, and they were at their most dangerous in the moment after they had been shaken, when the embarrassment curdled into something harder and colder. He pulled his composure back around himself, like a jacket squared his shoulders, and looked at Harmon with the expression of a man who had decided that the best response to being outranked was to pretend he hadn't noticed. "General," he said, and the word carried just enough inflection to make it sound like a compliment he hadn't quite meant. "I don't know what my father-in-law has told you about our family situation, but this is a private domestic matter. I have a valid court order." He reached into his jacket and produced a folded document, setting it on the table with the precise confidence of a man playing what he believes to be his strongest card. "My wife has been assessed by 2 licensed physicians as requiring a temporary psychiatric evaluation. The temporary detention order was signed by Magistrate Ellis of this district. I'd encourage you to read it carefully before you involve yourself further in something that doesn't concern you." Harmon looked at the document, did not touch it, looked back at Derek. "I read it last night," Harmon said. "The signature of Dr. Raymond Warren of Richmond appears on page 2. He picked up his coffee cup. "Dr. Warren has been fly fishing on the Blackfoot River in Montana for the past 11 days. I spoke to him at 5 this morning. He was not pleased to be woken up. He was considerably less pleased to learn that his name and credentials appear on a legal document he never signed." Derek's jaw tightened. A muscle jumped below his left eye. Small, involuntary, the kind of thing the body does when the mind is working very hard to appear calm. "That's a clerical error," Derek said. "Easily corrected. 18 U.S.C. 1001, said a voice from the hallway. Everyone in the kitchen turned. Dr. Carol Sims stood in the doorway of the guest room, dressed her leather satchel over one shoulder and a folder of documents in her hand. She walked into the kitchen with the brisk, unimpressed manner of a woman who had been in difficult rooms before and had never once found them interesting enough to be nervous about. 18 U.S.C. 1001, she repeated, setting her folder on the table. False statements and use of false documents submitted to a government agency. That's a felony, 5 years per count. She opened the folder and turned it to face Derek. "I am Dr. Carol Sims. I am a forensic psychiatrist certified by the Federal Bureau of Investigation and appointed by the United States District Court for the Western District of Virginia to conduct an independent competency evaluation of Sarah Briggs Holt." She tapped the top page. "I completed that evaluation last night. My findings, which will be submitted to the federal court this morning, are that Sarah Briggs Holt is a fully competent adult with complete decision-making capacity who has been subjected to a documented pattern of coercive control over a period of not less than 23 months. She closed the folder. "The TDO is void. The forged physician signatures constitute an additional criminal charge. And I would strongly suggest, Mr. Holt, that you stop talking until you have legal representation present." The room was very still. Derek stared at Dr. Sims with the expression of a man watching a wall he thought was load-bearing turn out to be decorative. His 6 men in black stood near the kitchen door, looking at each other with the particular uncertainty of people who are paid to be intimidating and have just realized that nobody in this room is intimidated. "Dale," Derek said, turning to Croft, and his voice had dropped to something lower and tighter than before. "We have 6 men. We have a court order, valid or not. It's on paper. Take Sarah and let the lawyers sort it out." Croft didn't move. He was looking at Harmon, had been looking at Harmon more or less continuously since the moment the general had stood up from the breakfast table, and the color that had started leaving his face in Task 10 had now completed its departure entirely, leaving behind something the color and texture of old concrete. "Dale," Derek said again, sharper a warning in it now. "I heard you," Croft said. His voice came out strange, compressed, like a man speaking through a closed fist. He still didn't move. Sarah had stood up from the table. She was standing beside me now, her hand wrapped around my forearm, fingers pressing in hard enough that I could feel her pulse in them, fast, frightened, but steady, holding on, trusting. "You're going to be all right," I said quietly, just for her. She pressed her fingers tighter and didn't answer, because some things don't need an answer. Then from outside, the sound that had been building in the background resolved itself into something specific and unmistakable: heavy vehicles stopping doors, opening boots on pavement. The crisp exchange of short professional communications between people who did not need to raise their voices because they had radios. One of Derek's men moved to the kitchen window and looked out. Whatever he saw made him take one slow step backward. Derek saw his man's face. "What is that?" Derek said. "What is out there?" Harmon set his coffee cup down on the table with a small, definitive click. "That," he said, "is the answer to your question about where the power came from." Before I reveal what was waiting outside that door and what Agent Reeves had on Derek Holt that he never saw coming, drop justice in the comments. Let me know you're ready. A reminder: this story contains some fictional elements. If you've stayed this long, I think you already know the message is worth it. The back door opened first. 2 agents in dark tactical vests came through it with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this hundreds of times and found nothing remarkable about it. 2 more came through the front. The 6 men Derek had brought with him, the ones built like furniture, looked at each other and made the collective unspoken decision that their employment agreement did not cover federal agents, and began moving quietly toward the walls. Then the main door opened and Agent Dana Reeves walked in. She was 38 years old and looked like someone who slept well and exercised regularly and had very little patience for theatrics of any kind. She was wearing a dark jacket with FBI across the chest, and she was carrying a folder that she held with the relaxed confidence of someone who knew exactly what was in it and was looking forward to reading it aloud. She stopped in the center of the kitchen, looked at Derek Holt, and said, "Mr. Holt, I'm Special Agent Dana Reeves, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Western Virginia Field Office. I have federal arrest warrants for you, issued this morning by the United States District Court." Derek's composure, which had been cracking in small ways for the past 20 minutes, chose this moment to fracture more visibly. His face went through several expressions in rapid succession: disbelief, calculation, and then something that was trying very hard to be contempt and was not quite making it. "On what charges?" he said. Agent Reeves opened the folder. "Wire fraud, pursuant to 18 U.S.C. 1343. She said, her voice carrying the flat, precise cadence of someone reading from a document they have already memorized. "Money laundering pursuant to 18 U.S.C. 1956. Interstate domestic violence pursuant to 18 U.S.C. 2261. She looked up. "The financial charges relate to your use of your father's Department of Defense logistics contracts as a vehicle for moving funds through a series of shell accounts over a period of approximately 31 months. The domestic charges relate to a documented pattern of coercive control and physical harm against your wife, Sarah Briggs Holt, corroborated by physical evidence, audio recordings, and witness testimony." Derek's mouth was open. He closed it, opened it again. "I want my lawyer." "You'll have access to legal representation at the processing facility," Reeves said. "You have that right, and we will honor it." She handed the warrant to one of her agents and looked at Derek with the expression of someone who had heard that particular sentence many times and found it neither threatening nor interesting. "Turn around, please, Mr. Holt." Derek turned around. He was shaking fine, barely visible, but I could see it from where I stood, the tremor in his hands as they came behind his back. The man who had driven past my house in the dark. The man who had cut my water and sealed my shop and tried to have my daughter declared incompetent. Standing in my kitchen shaking while an FBI agent put handcuffs on his wrists. I felt Sarah's hand tighten on my arm. Then Reeves turned, and what happened next was the thing that I had not expected, the thing that landed differently than everything else. She turned toward the kitchen door where Thomas Holt had been standing since the agents came in. He had not moved. He had not spoken. He had simply stood in the doorway of a house that did not belong to him, watching his son get arrested with an expression on his face that I can only describe as the particular devastation of a man whose entire understanding of his life has just been revised without his permission. "Mr. Thomas Holt," Reeves said. Her voice shifted, not softer exactly, but with a different quality of attention. "Our investigation has identified a significant discrepancy in the pension accounts of Holt Corp employees, approximately 200 workers. The shortfall is $3,200,000 dispersed over 36 months through a series of internal transfers that were authorized using your digital signature. Thomas stared at her. Your digital signature, Reeves continued, which forensic accounting has determined was accessed without your knowledge using credentials obtained from your personal computer. She paused. You are not currently under arrest, Mr. Holt. Based on available evidence, you were not aware of these transactions. But we will need your cooperation and your testimony. Thomas Holt looked at his son. Derek was facing the wall now, hands cuffed behind him, and he did not turn around, did not speak, did not offer his father so much as a glance. Something moved across Thomas Holt's face, not the polished authority I had seen at his gate on the first morning, not the collapsed shock of the man who had watched his coffee cup shatter, but something rawer and older than either of those things. The particular grief of a father who has just understood completely and irrevocably that the person he raised became someone he does not recognize. His throat worked. He reached out and put one hand on the doorframe, steadying himself just for a moment. 200 workers, he said. His voice came out rough, abraded, like something pulled across gravel. Derek, those are people who worked for me for 20 years. Some of them, Gerald Marsh has been with me since '94. He has 3 grandchildren. He stopped, started again. Derek said nothing. Thomas Holt straightened. He took his hand off the doorframe and stood on his own. He looked at Agent Reeves with the expression of a man making a decision he should have made earlier and knew it. Tell me what you need from me, he said. Sarah made a sound beside me. Very small, compressed, the sound of someone processing something complicated in real time. I put my hand over hers where it rested on my arm. From outside came the sound of doors, vehicles, the organized movement of people doing their jobs. Derek Holt was walked past me toward the front door, and as he went by, I did not look away, and I did not say anything, because there was nothing left to say that the morning hadn't already said better. Sheriff Dale Croft was still standing near the back wall, and his eyes, when they finally stopped tracking Derek's exit, and found Agent Reeves held the specific expression of a man who had just realized that the ground he'd been standing on was not in fact ground. He was right about that. Sheriff Dale Croft had served Millbrook for 17 years. In 17 years, he had learned the rhythms of the county, which roads flooded in March, which families called on Saturday nights, which magistrates signed things without reading them carefully, and which ones needed more persuasion. He had built a life inside those rhythms. A modest house on the east side of town, a retirement account that was not as large as he would have liked, and a reputation for being the kind of man who got things done when the right people asked him to. The right people, as it turned out, had not been the right people at all. Agent Reeves had not moved toward him yet. She was speaking quietly to one of her colleagues near the front door, her back partially turned, her folder closed under her arm. To a man less experienced in the particular mechanics of being in trouble, this might have looked like an opportunity. Dale Croft took one step toward the back door, then another. His hand was reaching for the handle when Agent Reeves said, without turning around, "Sheriff Croft, I'd ask you to stay where you are." Croft stopped. His hand hung in the air an inch from the door handle, and he stood there for a moment that seemed to last considerably longer than it actually did. Reeves turned around. She walked toward him at the unhurried pace of someone who had never once in her career needed to run after anybody, and she stopped 3 feet away and looked at him with the particular expression of a person about to deliver information that is going to ruin someone's morning. "First National Bank of Roanoke," she said. "Account number ending in 4417, registered to a shell entity called DLC Property Holdings." She opened the folder to a specific page and held it up so Croft could see the transaction records printed on it. 3 deposits, $14,000 on March 14th, $18,500 on June 22nd, $14,500 on September 9th. She lowered the folder. Total of $47,000 transferred from an account controlled by Derek Holt, received by an account to which you have sole signatory authority. A pause. The account was opened 6 days after you were first approached by Derek Holt regarding the zoning compliance order against Mr. Briggs's property. Croft's hand came away from the door handle, slowly, like a man moving underwater. "I want a lawyer," he said. "You'll have one," Reeves said. "Please turn around." He turned around. And then he saw Derek. Derek Holt was standing near the kitchen entrance, wrists cuffed behind him, waiting to be walked to the transport vehicle. He was looking at the floor. He had been looking at the floor since the cuffs went on, which was the posture of a man who understood that there was nothing left to look at that was going to help him. Something happened to Dale Croft's face. It started in his eyes, a slow building heat that moved down through his jaw and into his neck, and turned what had been the gray stillness of a frightened man into something considerably more combustible. 17 years of service, a retirement account that was not as large as he'd liked, a reputation, a modest house, all of it, because this man in the expensive suit had told him it was a simple favor, a small thing, an old carpenter who didn't matter. "You told me," Croft said. His voice came out strange, too quiet, which in a large man is more alarming than loud. "You told me he was nobody. You told me it was a domestic dispute and the old man was causing trouble and all I had to do was file some paperwork." Derek did not look up. "Look at me," Croft said. Derek looked up. What happened next occurred very quickly. Croft's right fist connected with Derek's left cheekbone with the full force of a 220-pound man who had spent 17 years wanting to hit something and had finally found a target he felt was adequately deserving. The impact snapped Derek's head sideways and produced a sound that made Sarah flinch against my arm. Derek staggered, caught himself against the wall, and then Croft's second punch, left hand wild. Less controlled, caught him across the mouth, and Derek went down to one knee with both hands flying to his face. 2 teeth skittered across my kitchen floor. "That is enough," Reeves said, sharp and clear, and 2 agents had Croft by the arms before the word enough had finished leaving her mouth. They pulled him back and got his hands behind him, and the cuffs went on with a sound like a period at the end of a very long sentence. "He told me it was nothing." Croft shouted, not at Reeves, not at anyone official, just at the room, at the walls, at the general injustice of having made a catastrophic error in judgment for $47,000. He said, "Sign some papers as file some orders. Nobody gets hurt." "You told me nobody gets hurt." Derek was on his knees on my kitchen floor, both hands cupped over his mouth, blood showing between his fingers, making a sound that was somewhere between a groan and an expletive that I will not repeat. The agents began moving Croft toward the back door. He went not quietly, but he went still talking, still addressing Derek's bent back with the particular energy of a man who has figured out too late that he was never the one giving orders in this arrangement. Derek was helped to his feet by an agent who handed him a folded cloth for his mouth. They walked him toward the front. They were almost to the door when Croft, both arms pinned by federal agents' wrists locked behind him, feet barely maintaining contact with the floor, executed what I can only describe as a maneuver of pure undiluted spite. He twisted at the hip, got one leg free for approximately 1 second, and drove his boot heel backward and upward into the back of Derek Holt's left knee with enough force to send Derek stumbling, face first, into the doorframe with a sound like a melon dropped from a significant height. "That is enough," said Agent Reeves at a volume I had not previously heard from her. Derek slid down the doorframe to the floor, making noises. Croft was fully restrained now, 2 agents per arm, feet off the ground, still attempting to angle himself for another kick, with the grim determination of a man who has already lost everything and is investing heavily in what's left. "In the truck, into the truck, into the truck right now," one of the agents said, in the exhausted tone of a man who had not anticipated this development and was revising his opinion of the morning accordingly. The back door closed behind them. There was a brief ringing silence. Then one of the remaining agents, a young woman standing near the refrigerator, looked at her colleague across the room. Her colleague looked back at her. A conversation passed between them that required no words whatsoever. She exhaled through her nose. "I'll get the paperwork," she said. Sarah's grip on my arm loosened slowly, finger by finger, and she let out a breath that she seemed to have been holding since approximately the previous Wednesday. I felt, rather than heard, the small, involuntary sound. She made not quite a laugh, not quite a sob, but something that had elements of both the sound of a person whose body has decided it is finally cautiously allowed to feel something other than afraid. I put my arm around her shoulders. Outside vehicle doors were closing. Engines were starting. The organized, purposeful machinery of consequence was assembling itself and beginning to move. It was 7:43 in the morning. In the corner of my kitchen, Thomas Holt stood alone, watching the door his son had gone through, and said nothing at all. The last vehicle pulled away at 7:51 in the morning. I know the exact time because I looked at the clock above the kitchen door when the sound of the engines finally faded below the ridge, and I remember thinking that the most consequential morning of the past decade had lasted less than 90 minutes from start to finish. There was something almost administrative about that, all that wait, all that time resolved before 8 o'clock on a Thursday in October. I stepped out onto the front porch. Sycamore Lane was lined with people. Not a crowd exactly. This was Millbrook, not a stadium, but every house on the block had produced at least one person standing in driveways, or at the end of front walks, or just inside open doors, watching the last of the federal vehicles disappear around the bend in the road. Nobody was cheering. Nobody was talking very much. They were just present in the particular way that small-town people are present for the significant moments in each other's lives, not intrusive, not theatrical, just there. Edna Marsh was standing at the edge of her front path, with both hands wrapped around a mug of coffee she had clearly forgotten to drink, and she was crying. Not dramatically, Edna did nothing dramatically, but steadily, quietly, the way a person cries when they have been worrying about something for a very long time. And the thing they were worrying about has finally resolved itself, and the relief has to go somewhere. When she saw me on the porch, she pressed one hand over her mouth and shook her head slightly, not in negation, but in the way people do when words have temporarily become unavailable. Her shoulders were shaking. "Edna," I said. "Don't you say anything to me right now, Arthur Briggs," she said, her voice thick and unsteady. "I am pulling myself together, and it is taking a minute." "Take your time," I said. She made a sound that was half laugh, half something else entirely, and pressed her hand harder against her mouth. Jimmy Kowalski appeared from behind Edna's rosebush, where he had apparently been stationed since approximately 6 in the morning, and jogged across the lane with his phone held up like a trophy. He was grinning so wide it looked like it might be causing him structural difficulties. "Mr. Briggs," he said breathlessly, stopping at the bottom of my porch steps. "I got all of it, from the minute the first truck turned onto the lane. I got the FBI vehicles arriving, I got them going in, I got them coming out with..." He caught himself glancing at my expression. "With the people. I got everything. It's all in here." He held the phone up higher. "What do I do with it?" "You hold on to it," I said. "Agent Reeves is going to want to talk to you." Jimmy's eyes went very wide. "The FBI agent? The FBI agent." He stared at me for a moment. Then he stood up approximately an inch taller than he had been and said with considerable dignity for a 16-year-old in an oversized jacket, "I can do that." Pastor Glenn Webb came across the lane without hurry, the way he did everything, and climbed the porch steps and stood beside me. He was wearing his old brown cardigan, the one with the button missing on the third buttonhole that he had never gotten around to replacing in all the years I had known him. He looked out at the lane at the neighbors, slowly beginning to move and speak again, at Edna composing herself with great determination over her forgotten coffee. "Well," he said. "Yeah," I said. That was the entirety of the conversation, and it was sufficient. The screen door opened behind me, and Sarah came out. She was still in my flannel shirt, still in the wool socks, her hair loose around her face. She stood at the top of the porch steps and looked out at Sycamore Lane, at the neighbors at the empty road, at the space where the vehicles had been, and something moved across her face that I do not have adequate words for. Not relief alone, though it was that. Not grief alone, though there was that too. Something more like the particular feeling of a person who has been walking in the dark for so long, they had forgotten that light was a thing that existed and have just stepped out into a morning. Her chin was trembling, she pressed her lips together hard, fighting it, and lost, and then she stopped fighting it. She turned to me and put both arms around my middle and held on. I held her back. Her shoulders were shaking against my chest, deep, full shaking, the kind that comes from somewhere below, what tears can reach, and I kept one hand on the back of her head and one arm around her back and said nothing, because there are moments when saying nothing is the only thing that isn't inadequate. "It's over," she managed into my shoulder. "It's over," I said. She held on for another long moment. Then she straightened, wiped her face with the sleeve of my flannel shirt, and took one long, deliberate breath of October morning air, like a person reacquainting themselves with the general concept of breathing. Glenn put his hand briefly on her shoulder. She looked at him and nodded. Edna appeared at the bottom of the steps. Her composure substantially recovered and looked at Sarah with the expression of a woman who has opinions about what happens next. "You're coming to my kitchen," she said. It was not a question. I have apple cake, and I have actual coffee, and I am not taking no for an answer. Sarah laughed, real involuntary, the first completely unguarded laugh I had heard from her since she came home. Okay, Edna, she said. Good. Edna looked at me. You too. In a minute, I said. She accepted this and took Sarah by the arm and walked her across the lane with the authority of a woman who has decided what is needed and intends to provide it. Glenn followed, pausing at the bottom of the steps to look back at me with an expression that said he understood I needed a moment and that the moment was available if I wanted it. I turned. Thomas Holt was still in my front yard. He had come out at some point during the last few minutes. I wasn't sure exactly when, and he was standing at the edge of the porch steps with his hands in his pockets and his eyes on the ground. Not the posture of the man who had stood at his iron gate 2 weeks ago, with his arms crossed and his chin up. Something had gone out of him that I didn't think was coming back. He heard me turn. He looked up. We looked at each other across the width of my porch, the man who had called his nephew out to block my path on the first morning, and the man who had come to collect his daughter. Both of us older than we'd started, neither of us quite the same. Thomas opened his mouth, closed it. His jaw worked for a moment, and his eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with anger. "Mr. Briggs," he said. His voice was rough, uneven a road after a hard winter. I don't know where to begin. I looked at him for a long moment. The October sun was coming up properly now, clearing the ridge, laying itself across the lane in long, warm stripes. A leaf fell from the oak tree by the fence, yellow, turning slowly in the air, landing without a sound in the grass. "Then don't begin today," I said. Thomas Holt nodded, once slowly with the particular care of a man handling something fragile. I went inside. Agent Reeves came back at 11:30. Not with agents this time, just herself, a legal pad, and a pen. She knocked on the front door like a normal person, which I appreciated. I let her in, and she looked around the kitchen with the efficient cataloging eyes of someone who spent most of her professional life reading rooms, and then she set her legal pad on my kitchen table and said, "Is Thomas Holt still on the property?" "Want nästa åtgärdsbarn." "He was in the front yard an hour ago," I said. "I don't know if he's moved. Would you mind checking?" I went to the front door and looked out. Thomas was sitting on the bottom step of my porch. Not the imperious arms-crossed Thomas of the first morning, not the shattered Thomas of the arrest, but something else, a man with his elbows on his knees and his hands loosely clasped and his eyes on the middle distance, doing the kind of thinking that doesn't look like thinking from the outside, but is probably the most demanding kind. "He's there," I said. Reeves nodded. "Would you ask him to come in?" I went to the door and said, "Thomas, Agent Reeves would like to speak with you." Thomas looked up. He studied my face for a moment, as though trying to determine whether this was an invitation or a summons and what the difference meant in practical terms. Then he stood, brushed off his trousers with the automatic, habitual gesture of a man who kept himself presentable regardless of circumstances, and came inside. He sat down at my kitchen table across from Agent Reeves. I stood by the counter and did not leave, because this was my house, and Reeves did not ask me to. "Mr. Holt," Reeves said, "I want to be clear about your situation before we begin. Our forensic accounting team has established that the transactions affecting the Holt Corp pension accounts were executed using your digital credentials, accessed from your personal computer during a period when you were traveling. There is no evidence that you authorized or were aware of these transfers." She set a document on the table in front of him. "You are not a target of this investigation. However, your testimony regarding Derek's access to company systems and the sequence of events over the past 2 years would significantly strengthen the federal case." Thomas looked at the document. His hands folded on the table in front of him were very still. "If I cooperate," he said, "what happens to the 200 workers?" Reeves looked at him steadily. "The pension shortfall will be addressed through asset forfeiture proceedings against Derek's personal holdings. Our current assessment is that the accounts can be made whole within 90 days of conviction." Thomas was quiet for a moment. Outside, I could hear Edna's voice from across the lane. She was talking to Sarah, something light and ordinary about the apple cake apparently, and Sarah was responding with the particular cadence of someone being carefully, deliberately normal. "Gerald Marsh has worked for me since 1994, Thomas said to no one in particular. "I know," Reeves said. "He has a pension he's been counting on for 30 years. Thomas's jaw tightened. He looked at his hands. Derek knew that. He knew every one of those names. He grew up watching those men come to company dinners. He stopped. His throat moved. "Tell me where to sign." Reeves turned the cooperation agreement to face him and set a pen beside it. Thomas signed without reading it, which was either the decision of a man who trusted the process or the decision of a man who had stopped being concerned about what happened to himself. And I found I couldn't tell the difference and didn't particularly need to. Rosa Delgado appeared in the kitchen doorway. She had been in the back of the house with Dr. Sims, giving a formal statement. I had heard their voices low and steady for the past hour. She stopped when she saw Thomas, and for a moment neither of them spoke, and the kitchen held the specific tension of two people who have been in the same painful situation from different angles and are only now occupying the same room. Thomas looked at Rosa. He looked at her for a long time, long enough that the silence became something deliberate rather than accidental. "Miss Delgado," he said, "I've been sitting outside this house for 3 hours trying to figure out what to say to my son's wife." His voice was rough, uneven. "I think I owe the same conversation to you first. You were in my employ for 3 years. You saw things happening in my house that I should have seen, and you did something about them when I did nothing." He paused. "I don't have a version of this where that's acceptable. I'm sorry." Rosa looked at him for a moment, her chin lifted slightly. "You didn't know," she said. "I should have," he said. "Yes," she said. "You should have." It was not forgiveness exactly, but it was honest, which is sometimes more useful. Rosa gave a short nod, looked at Agent Reeves to confirm she was needed elsewhere, and went back down the hall. Dr. Carol Sims appeared next, carrying her leather satchel and her folder of completed documents with the brisk energy of a person whose morning had gone exactly according to plan. "I've completed my evaluation and my formal report," she said, setting the folder on the table. "Sarah Briggs Holt presents as a fully competent adult with intact decision-making capacity, sound judgment, and no symptoms consistent with the conditions cited in the TDO." She looked at Agent Reeves. "My report specifically notes the coercive control pattern, the history of isolation from family, and the restriction of communications, all of which are consistent with the federal domestic violence charges." She picked her folder back up. "The report goes to the district court clerk this afternoon. The TDO is dead." Something happened in my chest at those words. Something that had been braced for a very long time eased without fanfare the way a knot loosens when you finally stop pulling against it. Sarah appeared in the kitchen doorway. She and Edna must have come back across while I was listening to Dr. Sims. She had Edna's apple cake in one hand and 2 forks in the other, which told me that Edna had decided the situation called for reinforcements and had deployed accordingly. She stopped when she saw the room, Thomas at the table, Reeves, Dr. Sims with the folder. She looked at Thomas. Thomas looked at his hands, then at the table, then up at Sarah. His face was doing something complicated and difficult that he was not quite managing to control, and he knew it, and he was allowing it anyway. "Sarah," he said. His voice came out very quiet. "I owe you more than I can put in a room." Sarah stood in the doorway with the cake and the forks and her borrowed flannel shirt and her wool socks. And she looked at her father-in-law, the man who had sent Tyler out to block the gate, the man who had not seen what was happening in his own house, the man who had just signed a cooperation agreement on behalf of 200 workers and a 30-year employee named Gerald Marsh. "I know," she said. She walked to the table and set the cake down in the center, and she set 1 fork in front of Thomas Holt, and she sat down and took the other fork for herself. Thomas looked at the fork. He looked at the cake. He looked at Sarah. He picked up the fork. I turned to the window. Outside, the October sun was fully up now, clear and clean across Sycamore Lane. The oak tree by the fence had lost most of its leaves in the past week, the heavy bag of wind and disruption, I supposed, but the ones that remained were the color of good oak lumber, warm and honest and built to last. From behind me, I heard the small domestic sound of 2 people eating cake in a quiet kitchen. I let it sit there for a moment. Then I put the kettle on. Thomas Holt left at 2 in the afternoon. He had spent the intervening hours at my kitchen table eating cake, drinking tea that Sarah made without being asked, and saying very little. Not the silence of a man who had nothing to say, but the silence of a man who understood perhaps for the first time in a long while that talking was not always the most useful thing a person could do. Sarah refilled his cup twice. He thanked her both times. Small things. The kind that don't mean much individually and mean everything in aggregate. At 1:50, he pushed his chair back and stood. "Mr. Briggs," he said. I was at the counter, had been for most of the afternoon, close enough to be present and far enough to be out of the way. I turned. Thomas Holt looked different than he had this morning. Not smaller, he was still a broad man in his 60s with the bearing of someone accustomed to walking into rooms and being noticed. But something had rearranged itself inside the bearing, the way a house looks different after a storm has moved through it. Same structure, different atmosphere. I've been trying to find the right place to start this for the last 6 hours, he said. I don't think there is one, so I'm just going to say it. He held my gaze with the particular effort of a man who believes eye contact during an apology is a moral obligation. What happened to your daughter happened in my house under my roof for longer than either of us knows. I didn't see it. I told myself I was giving a young couple privacy. I told myself Derek was just that he had a strong personality, that Sarah was adjusting. He stopped. His jaw worked for a moment. I was wrong. Not confused, not uninformed, wrong, and I am sorry, Mr. Briggs. I am genuinely, profoundly sorry. The kitchen was very quiet. Sarah was sitting at the table, her hands wrapped around her teacup, watching me. Not with anxiety, she had moved past anxiety somewhere around the second piece of apple cake, but with the careful attention of a person who understands that what happens in the next few seconds matters and cannot be hurried. I looked at Thomas Holt. I thought about the iron gate at 6:45 in the morning. I thought about Tyler and his MMA gloves and his grin. I thought about a storage room with a bolt on the outside of the door, and my daughter sitting on the floor inside it and the sound her voice made when she finally got through to me. I thought about what it would cost me to stay angry and what it would buy me and whether those were the same number. The shop is still sealed, I said. Thomas blinked, processed this. And then, because he was above all else a man who understood the language of practical action, he reached into his jacket pocket and took out his phone. He made 2 calls. The first was to his attorney, a brief direct conversation in which he explained what he needed and when. The second was to the county administrative office where he spoke to someone about the specific documentation required to lift a municipal order placed on a property at his company's request. He hung up from the second call and looked at me. The order will be formally withdrawn by 4 o'clock, he said. The county will send confirmation to the new acting sheriff's office. Your shop will be clear by end of business today. I nodded. Thomas put his phone away. He looked at Sarah. She looked back at him, the woman who had sat across from him at holiday dinners for 2 years, who had smiled at the right moments and said the right things, and been very careful, always very careful, and who was now sitting in her father's kitchen in borrowed socks, holding a teacup with both hands. Sarah, he said, I don't expect anything from you. I want to be clear about that. Whatever you decide about the marriage, about any of it, I will not interfere, and I will not make things difficult. You have my word on that. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I know you won't, Thomas. Not warmth exactly, not coldness either. Something that left the door neither fully open nor fully shut, which was probably the most honest position available to either of them, and which Thomas seemed to understand because he nodded once and didn't push further. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. At the kitchen doorway, he paused and turned back and looked at me one more time. Mr. Briggs, he said, for whatever it's worth the man you were when you came to that gate, I've been thinking about it all day. A pause. My father was a carpenter. He left before I could respond to that, which was probably just as well because I didn't have a response prepared, and I'm not certain I would have found the right one. The screen door closed behind him. Sarah looked at me. I looked at Sarah. His father was a carpenter, she said. Apparently, I said. She considered this. Do you think that was an apology or a compliment? I think it was both, I said, and I think he knew it was inadequate either way, and said it anyway, which is about as honest as apologies get. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she said softly, I'm glad you let him talk. I'm glad you gave him the fork, I said. She smiled at that, not the fragile, careful smile I had been seeing for the past week, but something more settled, the smile of a person who has come through something and is beginning cautiously to believe they are on the other side of it. Agent Reeves called at 3:45. Mr. Briggs, the video footage obtained by James Kowalski this morning has been reviewed and formally entered into evidence. It's comprehensive. It captures the initial entry, the confrontation inside the house from the exterior windows, and the arrests. Combined with the financial records and the audio evidence, the federal case is about as solid as I've seen in 15 years. A brief pause. Your daughter should know that her testimony, if she chooses to give it, will matter. But even if she doesn't, this case stands on its own. I'll tell her, I said. One more thing, Reeves said. James Kowalski, is he a good kid? He is, I said. Why? Because I've watched this footage 3 times and his camera work is remarkably steady for a 16-year-old standing 30 feet from a federal arrest. Another pause, and I thought I heard something in her voice that might in a different context have been amusement. Tell him the Bureau appreciates the quality of the documentation. I looked across the kitchen at Sarah, who had heard enough of the call to raise her eyebrows in a question. Jimmy's going to be insufferable about this, I said after I hung up. Sarah laughed, a real one, full and unguarded, the kind that fills a kitchen. At 4:15, a county notification arrived confirming the withdrawal of the municipal compliance order on my property. The seal tape was still on my shop door. That was a physical thing, not a legal one, and it would wait until morning. I stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at the shop through the back window. The seal tape caught the late afternoon sun and made a thin yellow line across the door, and beyond the door was the workbench and the white oak and the hand plane and the 2 fluorescent lights that hummed like old hymns. Tomorrow I was going to take that tape down myself, 1 strip at a time. Sarah appeared at my shoulder and looked at the shop with me. Tomorrow, she said. Tomorrow, I said. The seal tape was more stubborn than I expected. I had assumed it would come off the way official things usually do, with some resistance, and then all at once clean. Instead, it clung to the wood with the particular tenacity of something that had been there long enough to settle in, and I had to work each strip slowly with a utility knife, and my thumbnail careful not to gouge the door frame, taking my time with the corners. I did not mind. It was just after 6 in the morning, the sky still the pale gray blue of early October, the air cold enough that my breath made small clouds in front of my face as I worked. I did each strip deliberately pulling it back at a low angle, the way you pull tape off good wood, slow and even no sudden movements. The fluorescent lights inside the shop were already on, humming their old familiar hymn through the glass of the small window. I had turned them on before I started. Old habit. You turn the lights on before you begin. By 7:15, the last strip came free. I folded them all together into a small yellow square and put them in my jacket pocket, because I was not going to leave them on my property, and I was not going to put them in my own trash can either. Some things you carry out yourself. I opened the shop door. The smell hit me, first sawdust and linseed oil, and the particular dry wood smell that builds up in a closed workspace over days, concentrated and warm even in the cold morning air. The white oak was still on the bench where I had left it. The hand plane was still beside it. Everything exactly where I had put it down 8 days ago, unchanged patient waiting, with the specific reliability of things that don't have anywhere else to be. I ran my hand along the surface of the oak. Still good, still straight. 8 days had not changed it. I thought I might find you here. Edna Marsh was at the shop door with a covered dish and an expression of complete determination. She had her good coat on the navy blue one. She wore to church, which told me she had decided this occasion warranted formality. Edna, I said. Apple cake, she said, setting the dish on the corner of the workbench with the authority of a woman who has decided that the appropriate response to most of life's events is to provide baked goods. And before you say anything about it, I know I brought one 2 days ago. This is a different cake for a different occasion. I wasn't going to say anything, I said. Good. She pulled back the foil, releasing cinnamon into the sawdust air. Sarah's still asleep. I checked. I looked at her. You checked? I knocked very softly. She didn't answer. That means she's sleeping and she needed to? Edna said this with the matter-of-fact certainty of a woman who had raised children and knew the difference between a door that needed opening and one that needed leaving alone. Let her sleep. Pastor Glenn Webb arrived at 7:30 with a push broom and no explanation, which was the most Glenn thing I had ever seen him do. He simply walked into the shop, found the broom in the corner where it had always been, and began sweeping the accumulated dust of 8 days from the floor in long, steady strokes. You don't have to do that, I said. I know, he said, and kept sweeping. Jimmy Kowalski appeared at 8, wearing his grandmother's old garden gloves because he had apparently decided today was a working day and had prepared accordingly. He stood in the shop doorway with an expression of genuine purpose. I want to help, he said. Tell me what to do. Organize the lumber along the back wall by width, I said. Narrowest to widest, left to right. He looked at the lumber, back at me. How do I tell the width? There's a tape measure on the second shelf. He found it immediately, snapped it open with more confidence than was strictly warranted, and got to work. I watched him for a moment, 16 years old, in garden gloves, measuring boards in a cold shop at 8 in the morning, because he had decided he wanted to be useful and felt something that was not quite pride, but was close enough to it that the distinction didn't much matter. "Jimmy," I said. He looked up. "The FBI agent said your camera work was remarkably steady." He stared at me for a full 3 seconds. Then his face broke into the widest, most unself-conscious grin I had seen from him in the 2 years I'd known him, and he turned back to the lumber and said with tremendous dignity, "I knew I should have charged them a licensing fee." Edna made a sound from the corner that was definitely a laugh. My phone rang at 9:15. Ray Harmon. Arthur? His voice had the particular quality of a man who has finished doing something large and is now reporting the result. Derek Holt entered a plea agreement this morning, Federal Court, Western District of Virginia. He agreed to plead guilty to all counts: wire fraud, money laundering, the domestic charges. A pause. The sentencing guidelines on this combination with the aggravating factors and no cooperation discount put him at approximately 14 years in a federal facility. The judge will have the final word, but the prosecutor is confident. The pension accounts will be addressed through asset seizure within 90 days. I leaned against the workbench. 14 years. I held that number for a moment, turned it over, set it down. "Dale Croft," I said. 8 years. He took a deal this afternoon, cooperation in exchange for the lower end of the range. He's going to testify about the specific orders Derek gave him. Harmon paused. He also apparently asked through his attorney whether you intended to pursue a civil claim against the county for the property seizure. "Tell him no," I said. A brief silence. "I'll pass that along." Another pause. "Tyler Holt, 17, first offense, juvenile jurisdiction. Suspended sentence, 200 hours community service." And I heard something in Harmon's voice that might have been satisfaction carefully contained. His instructor at the MMA gym, Master Brixton, he saw a report of the incident filed with the juvenile court. He called Tyler in on Saturday in front of the full class and formally revoked his belt. I thought about Tyler on the ground in the driveway, still wearing his MMA gloves, curled around a liver shot he had not seen coming. I thought about the particular look of a young man who has been told his whole life that he is dangerous and has just discovered in the most direct possible way that the world contains people who did not get the memo. "That'll stay with him longer than the community service," I said. "That was Master Brixton's opinion as well," Harmon said. "He called it a teachable moment. I believe the lesson was about the difference between performing toughness and actually having it." "Smart man," I said. "Most people who've been doing something real for 30 years are." A pause warmer now. "How's the shop?" I looked around, Glenn sweeping in long strokes, Edna cutting cake at the corner of the workbench, Jimmy measuring lumber with the tape measure and muttering the numbers to himself so he wouldn't forget them. "It's good, Ray," I said. "It's good." I heard him exhale, not dramatically, just the quiet exhale of a man who has carried something a long way and is putting it down. "Good," he said. "I'll see you soon." I hung up. Glenn had stopped sweeping and was looking at me from across the shop. I gave him a small nod. He gave one back and resumed sweeping. Edna cut a slice of cake and put it on a paper plate and set it on the workbench next to my hand plane without saying anything. I ate it standing up, looking at the white oak tasting cinnamon and brown sugar, and the particular sweetness of an ordinary morning in October. At 10 o'clock, footsteps on the gravel path outside. Sarah appeared in the shop doorway in the flannel shirt and the wool socks, her hair loose, a small cloth-wrapped package held in both hands with the careful deliberateness of someone carrying something that mattered. She looked at Glenn and Edna and Jimmy, all three of them busy, all three of them glancing over and nodding and going back to what they were doing, as though her presence in this space were the most natural thing in the world, which it was. She looked at me. She held out the package. She had sewn them back together with red thread. I could see at the moment I unwrapped the cloth-thin stitches running along the split seam of the left glove, following the original line of the leather, with the care of someone who had studied how a thing was made before attempting to fix it. The thumb seam separating for years was closed. The lacing loops were reinforced. Every place the leather had started to give way had been found and attended to. I turned the left glove slowly. The red thread caught the fluorescent light above, small, deliberate, honest. "I found a leather worker in Roanoke," Sarah said. "It took her 2 days. She said whoever made these knew what they were doing." 1982, I said. She could tell. I held the glove and felt the weight of it, not heavy, but present in the way things are present when they have been through enough to earn it. "Thank you," I said. Sarah's eyes were bright. She pressed her lips together and nodded, not trusting her voice, which was all right. Some things don't need a voice. Ray Harmon arrived at 11 with 2 coffees from the diner on Main Street. He looked around the shop, Glenn sweeping a floor already clean, Edna rearranging shelves that didn't need it, Jimmy on an upturned bucket measuring scrap pine with the focused expression of a boy who had decided to take carpentry seriously. "Nice shop," Harmon said. "It's a good shop," I agreed. We drank coffee the way men who have known each other 40 years drink it, without ceremony, without filling the quiet, letting it be what it was. Rosa Delgado arrived before noon in her gray knit cap, carrying tamales from a place in Roanoke she claimed was the only restaurant within 50 miles worth the drive. Edna reorganized the workbench immediately. Glenn produced paper plates from somewhere. Jimmy abandoned the tape measure without hesitation, which was the correct priority. The shop filled with warm corn and chili and the sound of ordinary conversation, the weather turning cold. The road work on County Route 12, whether the diner had changed its pie recipe. Edna insisted it had not. Nobody argued with her. Sarah sat beside Harmon and asked him about Fort Bragg. He told her about the summer of '82, the heat, the smell of the gym, the way I had looked at him the 7th time he went down. Not with frustration, just with the quiet certainty that standing back up was the only available option. "He never said good job," Harmon told her. "Not once all summer." Sarah looked at me. "That sounds right." "I said it once," I said. "The last day." "You said not bad," Harmon said. "That is not the same thing." "For me it is," I said. Edna laughed. Glenn smiled into his paper plate. Jimmy stored the information away with the expression of someone who intended to use it later. It was Rosa who noticed Thomas first. "Mr. Briggs," she said quietly. The door. Thomas Holt stood at the entrance on the threshold, one hand on the frame, as though he had arrived somewhere he wasn't certain he had the right to enter. Yesterday's clothes. Hair less neat than usual. The face of a man who hadn't slept and had stopped caring whether it showed. The shop went still. I looked at Sarah. She gave me nothing which was the right thing to give me because this was mine to decide. I lifted my chin toward the interior. Thomas stepped inside. He found a corner near the lumber stack and sat on an upturned crate, hands folded, saying nothing to anyone, simply present, taking up only what space was necessary. Nobody made it strange. Glenn nodded once. Edna offered a tamale, which Thomas accepted. Rosa didn't look at him for a long time. Then she did. That was enough. The afternoon moved the way Virginia, October afternoons move, unhurried, golden, the particular light that comes when leaves are mostly down and nothing blocks the sun. The shop was warm with bodies and fluorescent light and the smell of food. Outside, through the small window, the oak tree threw long shadows across the gravel path. At some point, the conversation went quiet, not uncomfortably. The way a good meal ends not when the food runs out, but when everyone is full. I picked up the gloves from the workbench, held the left one, red thread bright against brown leather. 43 years. A gym in North Carolina. A girl in a hospital in 1996. A storage room with a bolt on the outside. 8 days in October. The left glove more worn than the right. The way it always is for southpaws. I wrapped them back in Sarah's cloth and carried them to the corner of the shop where the steel box sat on the bottom shelf. I opened it, set the gloves inside on top of the photograph of 43 men at Fort Bragg. I closed the lid. When I turned around, Sarah was watching from across the shop, eyes bright and steady. Harmon had his coffee. Glenn rested both hands on his broom handle. Edna looked at the window. Jimmy watched me with the open attention of a boy who knows he is witnessing something he doesn't fully understand yet but will remember. Thomas Holt looked at the floor. I picked up the hand plane. The white oak was still on the bench, still waiting, still straight. 8 days had not changed it. I set the plane against the grain and pushed. The shaving rose in a long, clean curl, pale and thin, catching the light falling without a sound. The fluorescent lights hummed. Outside, a leaf came off the oak tree and turned slowly in the October air, the color of good lumber, and landed in the gravel without a sound. I kept working. I've thought about this family story a lot since October. A man spends 68 years building something quiet, a shop, a life, a daughter he'd do anything for. And in 8 days he learns that the walls he thought were protecting her were the ones keeping her in. If there's a lesson I'd pass along, it's this: don't be like me. Don't wait for the phone call at midnight. Don't assume that no news is good news. Ask the harder questions earlier while there's still time to change the answer. This family betrayal didn't announce itself. It came in small silences and careful smiles, in a daughter who said, "I'm fine," with a voice that wasn't. I heard it. I just didn't push. I believe God doesn't close a door without putting a hand on your shoulder first. I felt that hand. I just needed 8 days to understand what it was telling me. Every family story has a version of this. The thing nobody said, the room nobody entered, the question nobody asked. Don't let yours become the one you wished you'd asked sooner. And if this family betrayal reminded you of something, someone you haven't called a door, you've been standing outside of, go knock. If this story reached you, leave a comment below. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is the kind of story we tell every week. Thank you for staying until the end. The stories that follow contain some fictional elements crafted with the intention to educate and inspire. If that's not what you're looking for today, no hard feelings. Step away and find what fits you best. But if you're staying, we're glad you're here.